talking about case study research. It's something that I've done for quite a number of years, and Per as well. Per's going to be giving the second part of this afternoon's talk, and I'll tell you exactly what he's covering and what I'm covering in a few minutes. But just quickly, in terms of background, both of us have come from the innovation management field. Both of us, for probably in the order of about 20 years, have done case studies, and it's something we're really passionate about. And the original drive for us to go and start researching case study research as well, so not only thinking using it in our own research, but to actually research how it's done in our field, came from somewhat of frustration of seeing that a lot of the papers we were asked to review, although we're both very keen on the case study method, weren't of particularly high quality. So what we started was about 4 years ago, a project where we wanted to look at what is the quality of case study research, what's that actually mean, and what can we do, in at least in the innovation field, to try and help start to improve the quality. So this afternoon, what we want to do is, for the first part, we're going to be, it's going to be me, and I'm going to be talking about some of the research we've done and the template we've developed for assessing the quality of research, or quality of research done by case studies. I'm going to do a presentation of that until about past. Then we're going to break you into small groups that Gebrat is going to assign at random. It's a pretty large audience, which is great. We're really pleased. There's about 130 of you. We're going to put you into small groups and ask you then to discuss when, where, and how you can possibly apply this template in your own research. And during that time, both Par and myself will go around the group, so we get at least a bit of a chance to meet you. We know, of course, that when you go into your groups, that will be the first time you're meeting other people. So there'll be a quickly sort of, where are you from, what do you do, type of thing. So we understand that. In this format is just so much harder than the normal in-person physical format that we're missing at the moment. When we get you back at about 5 to 4, these are our time, CET times, but just under an hour's time, we're going to get a couple of groups at random just to feedback what was their discussions, and then we're going to move on to the second part of the presentations this afternoon, which is going to be Per, and he's going to be talking not about the paper that we've already published that we sent to you as pre-reading. He's going to be talking about some of the research we're currently doing, where we're looking at what we call CP and CI, how cases are presented, CP, case presentation, and how authors actually interpret and theorize from the research. So we think that's a really key point about how you can improve the quality of case research, and so we're going to talk in depth about that. Then we're going to have a short breakout as well, where people discuss which ideas can they apply to improve their case presentation and interpretation, and as planned, we're going to finish in 2 hours time at 5 o'clock for me, Central European time, and for the colleague in Hong Kong, just about, I guess, midnight, so quite late, and mid-morning for some of you on the other side of the globe in the States. So that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to go quickly on to straight away the topic of our case study research and what I mean by that. And during the talk, I'll explain a bit why I've chosen this symbol, which is the scales used in legal situations where you're weighing up evidence. I'm going to come back and explain a bit why I've chosen that as a symbol on this slide. But first of all, we want to go over with you some of the key results of our current study, published in 2019 in an innovation journal. Now, the reason we started this research, mentioned a bit earlier, but innovation management's a fast-moving field. It's largely driven by practice. So you've got things like open innovation was a big topic. Now you've got design-driven innovation. So every few years there's a new idea that comes up, becomes very popular with practitioners, and then academics start to study it. So if it's an area where practice is leading, there's a lot of exploratory research. So we'd expect probably quite a lot of case study research, as it is a method that's particularly effective for exploratory type of research. So it's fast moving, and we expect that. Unfortunately, anecdotally, myself and the other authors of the article thought there was actually quite low numbers of case study articles in some of the top journals, and we wanted to know why, and was there anything that could be done to change that. We were frustrated as a reviewer seeing, really interesting topics, case study research really appropriate for exploratory, and then as a reviewer you're just having to turn it down because it just wasn't done very well, and we thought that was a shame as well. And then we started initially to look, well, is this a problem in innovation? And we found in a number of other fields, I've only written 3 here, but we found in a number of fields, including operations management, industrial marketing, and IS information systems, we found that there was quite a debate about methodology, including case study research in these other areas. And what was interesting, we found in the innovation field, there's been very little really discussion about methodology, and we thought that wasn't great. So we thought we could learn from these other areas. So not only those, general management, organizational science, other areas, there tends to have been for quite a number of years some discussions about what type of methodology is appropriate for management research and the role of case studies within that. So we thought we'd look deeper, and the aims of our study were to identify all of the case study papers published in a 20-year timescale. So we decided 20 years, and we wanted to know everything that had been published as a case study article. Turned out to be 818, and that's a number I'll probably never forget, because between myself and our co-authors, we probably read each of us half of them, so 409. We wanted to develop a way of measuring the quality of case study research. We wanted to find a way of giving some sort of quantitative assessment of an article. So we deliberately wanted an evaluation template. We wanted to have a look at whether we could give some guidelines for researchers about how to improve their case study research, and then look at the implications for researchers, reviewers, and journal editors. So we had quite a lot of things we're aiming to do with this study. And so it's usually the usual thing with Zoom, it's always a bit slower. So I always find you have to slow yourself down on Zoom compared to in the classroom. First thing, how many articles? Well, we took the top 5 journals, we took those by impact factor, and they happen to be research and R&D management, Journal of Product Innovation Management, research policy, technology forecasting and social change. You see all of these at the bottom, and Technovation. So these are 5 well-respected journals in the innovation field. And you can see here the yellow line is the total. And so you can see the yellow line is typically between about 10, just around 10, sometimes up to 15%. So across the 5 top journals in our field innovation, it's about 15% of articles are based on case study research. Huge differences between the different journals. And if you're a researcher looking to publish in the innovation field, the journal that's most open to case studies, which is this red line here, that's R&D management, and you can see it probably averages at about 30%. So quite big differences between the journals on this. And then, of course, you could argue, should it be 50%? Well, probably not, because there's other methods, and case studies is a good method for exploratory, but there are other approaches. There's grounded theory, sometimes maybe action research, different other things there as well. But we first of all had a look at how many case study papers are there out there. And of course, this, with these 5 journals, took us to this, never going to forget the number 818 in these journals, which we then wanted to have a look at. And we wanted for every one of those 818 to find a reliable way of assessing their quality. And what we did there was we went to the different disciplines where we'd found some of this work had already been done. So for instance, a paper at the top here, Dubé and Paré, is a very good paper in information systems, where it looked at their last 10 years. So it was published in 2003. It looked at essentially the whole of the 1990s, 183 articles, and it looked there at how good were those articles in terms of quality. And they developed a way of looking at that. And you can see on this top line, they looked at the research design, data collection, data analysis. So they developed a method for assessing papers, and we found other papers in different management fields. So we found Gibbert et al. From 2008, looked at general management case study research. We found a number of these. And what we wanted to do, and they had different samples from between 10 years up to 16 years, a number of these. And we thought, what can we learn from these in total? And we wanted to learn from the way they'd assess case study papers. We didn't want to start from scratch and reinvent the wheel, we want to learn from them, but we did really want to, as I say or show on the top of this slide here, we wanted to be very pragmatic, and we wanted our tool to be simple enough to be on one page, just because we thought that was important to give people an easy overview of what we're trying to assess. We wanted as well to make it reliable, so we did a lot of testing where various people looked at the same set of articles, and we looked at their different ratings of different articles, and we then took measures to assess and then anchor our scores. So we did a whole lot of work there I'm not going to describe in detail to improve the reliability and validity of our tool, but we had this goal of putting it on one page, which fortunately we achieved, but you'll see we had to go to quite a small font. Now, this is a bit of an eye test in the internet, and we've sent the paper in advance. You can have a look at a copy in more detail there. And at the bottom, you'll see there's a link to our website at Stockholm School of Economics, where there's some more notes and extra information on anchoring, etc. But to show you the template and overview, remember, we're trying to assess everything about the quality of a case study article on one page. So what have we got on here? We've got essentially the demographics, authors, title, journal, easy stuff, year of publication. On there, we've got a place to put in the number of cases. Key to note that we didn't say that a single case is higher or lower quality than a multiple case. You can have great single case study research, or you can have bad single study research. Similarly, you can have multiple cases that are done well or done badly. So we deliberately took that. We didn't put that in the, essentially in the rating scale. Another thing we took out is the number of data sources, because some papers use more data sources, which could lead to better research. But on its own, the number of data sources doesn't mean the research is done better. So we took a couple of things out there and essentially said they're not things that we're going to put into the rating scale. Now, the rating scale for a paper, again, to be pragmatic, keep it simple, easy overview, we decided we would look at the 10 most important criteria. So going back to the previous slide, where we had a whole table of various other research, we took ideas from all of those papers, and we looked at what was the most set of 10 important criteria for a case study paper, and we chose those. There are in some of those other papers some really detailed, great ways of going even deeper, but we were very keen to make this a single page overview. So it's score out of 10. Additionally, on the case template, we've got the evaluation criteria, an explanation of that, and the anchoring statements. More anchoring and more detailed information is on the website at the bottom for people applying it. And then we chose to take a number of criteria. We assigned 3 criteria to research design around theoretical foundation, pilot study, and theoretical sampling. So we had 3 of our 10 criteria were linked with the design. 3 were linked with data collection, whether it was triangulated, whether it was transparent. Some papers are very good at showing how the data was collected. They'll even give you tools and templates, and they'll tell you how they reviewed and validated their evidence, sometimes going back to interviewees or data sources to check them. So we thought data collection, and you'll see the template essentially is quite similar in the way it's built up to the process of research design, data collection. Next set of criteria, not surprisingly, data analysis, which we also applied 3. And of course, with only 10 criteria to apply, means the whole template is very parsimonious, and we're cramming a whole lot of thinking into a single sheet. And finally, last not least, we put what we call post hoc. How well in a paper did the author or authors step back and consider the quality of what they'd achieved in their design, implementation, analysis, etc. Good papers will, in the finishing section, have a really good discussion of limitations and how well the research was done in a critical way. So that was the set of 10 criteria that we came up with. And then when we went to the journals, here the yellow line is in the middle between 2 and about 4. So you can see on average it's quite low. And we've got on here, the blue line at the top is Journal of Product Innovation Management, where over the last 20 years, you can see it sort of started around 3 and increases up to around about 6, drops a bit and goes up again. But across the 5 journals we looked at innovation management, unfortunately, our gut feeling before we started this was that a lot of the papers were not particularly high quality. Was verified. And what do we mean by this? There are 10 criteria which we would say are not rocket science. The 10 criteria have been in the methodology literature for years. So there's nothing, we haven't come up with a new criterion or a new way that hasn't been talked about and discussed for years. And we found it quite surprising that on average, even today, the last few years, again, the yellow line, it's around about 4. So it means 6 of the things on our template authors are not considering, and in their write-up 6 of those things are not covered, which we found quite shocking. On here, looking the same data set again but presented in a different cut, we've got here the overall quality score on the left hand side, and then we've got the 5 journals, and I'm just going to try and move my menu bar up just in case sometimes Zoom blocks out things with the menu bar, hopefully not for you guys. So key thing here, if you look at the left hand column, it's the overall score between 0 and 10. It would be great if an article at 10, we actually found no article in the data set covered absolutely everything. Look at though the numbers here, quite a few, 13% on our set of criteria didn't score anything. And you can see the mean scores here for the different journals. Journal of Product Innovation Management mean score across all papers was 4.75, and for the whole total 818 papers 3.05. So unfortunately some quite low scores there, but in some ways that didn't totally surprise us. It shows quality is poor. What can we do to help do something on it? What we then did was we went step back and said, well, for each of the individual criteria, these 10 criteria, what are some of the ones that are addressed by most authors or not? And we had a look here. So number 2, you can see at the bottom, only 7% of people actually consider doing a pilot study. So pilot study, only 7. And we do say, many often people will think of you doing a multiple case study. You do the first case will be the pilot, and then you improve your tools, etc. But actually for a single case, you can still test out some of the data collection methods with a smaller subsample of interviewees or whatever your other data sources are. So we think, and the literature all the way back to Miles and Huberman says, a pilot study will help you improve your research design, and it's needed. Case study research needs a pilot. Only 7% of the papers did that. Another one we found that was very low is only 8% of the papers reported any way of trying to check that the coding presented, the results presented, were reliable because multiple coders had checked them. So another way of looking at it is 92% of the papers that we found appeared to be done by 1 or 2 authors, but with no checks of intercoder agreement, which we thought was unfortunately not great. So there's a whole lot of things here in terms of learning that we see across the criteria. Other ones here, I can take other examples. Some of these yellow ones, theoretical sampling, choosing the sample of companies you're going to have in your cases or your single case in a way that matches the phenomenon you're interested in, and you're looking then to choose the cases in a better way than easy access, the sort of opportunistic case study sampling, unfortunately, is rife. And we found that at least 46%, the good news, 46% of people did consider the way they chose their sample, but it means that 50% didn't. And you can see across this set of 10 criteria, there's a whole lot of examples here where there are many things that we could learn, because some of these numbers are quite low, and I'll show you another one here. Would be, for instance, the transparency of data collection. Only about 21% of people showed exactly how they collected their data or gave instruments. And what a waste, because it means that other people, if they read that paper, they can't see exactly how the work was done. And generally, we found in many papers that people would say, we're doing case study research, and they wouldn't do a good job of analyzing previous cases and improving on their building and improving on previous case study methodology. And that's something I think is actually better in quant, because in quantitative research survey, you really normally find a very clear, this survey is looking at these things, it takes these measures, it takes these items from other studies, it proves them, you get a Cronbach's alpha proof, etc., etc. So there's quite a good method goes through there. That's often missing in case study research, the ones we show or looked at in innovation management. I should say that Per is going to be talking about some of our latest research where we're going broader than the innovation management journals as well, for those of you from other fields. We do think potentially, though, that CaseIt can help in other fields, as it's is putting everything on the one page and trying to show the fundamentals of case study research design and how to audit that. So let's move on to the next one. So summary for that side, there's a lot of improvements that can be made. And what we did do is we also, in the paper, we identified 23 articles, which on our scale of 0 to 10, nothing got 10, some got 9, but we found 23 articles in innovation management from different fields, from open innovation through to design, lots of different topics, but we found 23 papers that we listed as exemplary. We defined there as anything above 8 on our scale must be pretty good. So just want to show you a bit from some of that research. We've, on the CaseIt template, we have, based on previous in other disciplines research on the quality of cases, we've chosen 10 criteria, from pilot study all the way through to how a case study theorizes at the end, how well it does its interpretation of the data. And these 10 criteria, we could look at our exemplary work that we found in our database and then look at some of the things they did. I'm not going to go through all 10 criteria. The slides that you get copies of, you get the PDF of them, you'll get other examples in there, but I just wanted to show you some of the sorts of examples you get on these. So what these next slides do is they show you the 10 criteria, from theoretical foundation through to post hoc analysis or post hoc interpretation of how well the research is done. These 10 criteria, what can we do to help researchers with some concrete advice? And we've got some few examples I've put together here. And afterwards, Per is going to be discussing 2 of them. So 2 criteria, particularly this case presentation and case interpretation. I should note here, he'll cover more, but imagine the complexity of how a case is written up or how a case is interpreted. On our template, we've got a dichotomous, a score of 0 or 1. And there's a whole lot more rich thinking in there that Per will cover. So we've started in our latest research to zoom in on criteria 8 and 9 further. But let's go and have a look at some of the others first. Number 1, as I said, that on the theoretical foundation, a lot of people still miss this. Only 52% of it discuss it in a paper. This is a paper that we thought did a good discussion of that. It's Micheli et al. This is a professor at Warwick University in the UK, does a lot of work on design thinking. And you can see this table is from his work. It's key articles on the role of design and designers. And what it does in there, it's saying, well, these other authors have done research. This is the sample they've taken. And then based on that, there's an argument about the sample that Micheli does. So it's a really clear, easy for readers to understand why that sample was chosen. So we thought that was a very good example of good practice on that. This is an example of pilot studies. This is Koch and Beeman's Dutch colleagues, Technovation in 2009. And in there, they've got this very nice table where they talk about the first stage where they did 5 pilot case studies. The second stage was 4 in depth. and they talk there about how they chose them, and there's a whole lot of learning that's very clear in the paper about how their data collection instruments and analysis improved because they did the pilots. So a good paper to have a look at if you're interested in how to do good pilots and how to write them up in the end. Here, another one on theoretical sampling here. Van Eichelt from 2008, and talking here about, and I've underlined some of the text in their article about, instead of random selection of cases, theoretical sampling, and they chose their cases. Theoretical sampling was based on the degree of innovation, and the sampling criteria were used to also identify degree of innovativeness. So you've got a whole lot of factors that they're studying in the phenomenon of interest, and they're showing how they chose the companies they were going to look at based on the things they were investigating rather than opportunistic. So I think good example there. So I'm not going to go through the other 7 of the criteria, but they're in the slide, some examples there. There's quite a lot of examples in the paper we add as well. Summary for this first part, unfortunately in our field, innovation management discipline, it's relatively poor quality. A lot of the case study research, we hope we can help improve that. Some of the issues most overlooked are a pilot study, intercoder reliability checks, transparency of data collection, and even reflecting at the end of the paper about how good the quality was. And you can see by the numbers of how often they're overlooked. A whole lot of things which, if you start to build those into your research design and paper, you can improve things. So there's a number of things there which we think would make sense now, rather than a monologue of me into the ether, into the internet, with always in lecturing to relatively large groups who are virtual is always a bit challenging. So what we've decided now is we'd like you to break into groups, just to tell you why the scales from the legal, and remember the Statue of Liberty has also got scales, legal ones as well. Fairness, the scales represent fairness and good evidence and decisions based on in law. And there's an expression that was adopted, I think, originally from law by people like Marsden, whom they say you've got to show a good trail of evidence. You've got to show every step of how you made your case studies and how you get good interpretation. Remember as well that people say you have to be careful that if you don't do a good job of the trail of evidence, you'll be on trial. There'll be the trial of your evidence. So we want to help you avoid that the reviewers and colleagues really put your evidence on trial because you've done an effective job of it. So what we'd like to do now, abruptly, is if you can put people into groups at random, just to tell you that both, there'll be quite a number of groups, but both Per Åhlström and my colleague and myself will be visiting the groups just to say hello, so we'll get to know you slightly better. Obviously with 120 people and virtual format, it's a bit challenging, but we've put you into groups and we'd like you to think when, where and how can you apply cases in your research. When you come back in 25 minutes time, we'll probably pick a couple of groups at random and just get them to tell us what came out of their discussions. You don't need to do any slides. All you need to do is in your group, just have one person who's willing to act as a spokesperson and tell us your key results. And then Per and I will discuss those a bit before we go on to the second session. So good luck in the groups. Hopefully the case is relatively easy to understand, and I look forward to catching up with you in the breakout groups. Very pleased that we've got a group that's volunteered to present some of their conclusions from the discussions. So I'm going to hand over to Brian McLafferty, who's based in Ireland, just outside of Dublin, who's going to report back for the discussions in the group he was in. Please, Brian.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, so yeah, we had a great conversation on the templates and the structure, and I think we all concluded the same thing, which was this really provides a very nice framework, in terms of testing the quality of the work that we're doing. In essence, what we could do and should do is use it maybe to construct a matrix, and in effect, I think what we all said was a lot of what we were doing or are doing intuitively, this really puts a nice package to it, if you will, and puts a nice frame to it, and obviously will guide us along in terms of making sure the quality of the cases that we work on are good. So I think all in all, really nice bit of work and very solid in terms of how it might guide us to develop our own case study research.
Great, thanks very much, Brian. Is there somebody else from another group who would volunteer, please, just to take us through their findings as well before we just quickly discuss that and give some comments on?
Yeah, over here. My name is Fabrício Neves.
Fabrício, great.
I'm from Brazil, University of São Paulo.
Okay.
Just have also a great chat in the other room. And one thing that was thinking about is like we got some overwhelm about everything that have to be done to do a great case study. It's like going on the framework. We thought, how gonna be writing all the steps that we took on the framework without making some mistakes in a way in the writing that's gonna be smooth to the reader. I believe that's the great point.
Great. Thanks very much, Fabrício. That's actually perfect in terms of leading into the next topic, because we're going to be talking about that, because we see in a way that the template has got 10 criteria, 8 of which are more about the research design, data collection and analysis, and then you've got 2 which we call CPCI, case presentation, case interpretation, which are the hard ones. And as I said earlier in the presentation, to really rate a paper on how well it's presented on a scale of 0 to 1 is a bit mission impossible, we know that, but that's why Åhlström is going to take you deeper into that. We'll be looking at those as well. One thing that I learned last week, I was on one of my PhD students had a progress panel, and it was interesting there because the student had done a systematic literature review, which I guess a lot of you will now know. It's been very popular in management research for about 15 years. Originally, the idea came from medicine. So you'll find lots of systematic literature reviews looking even today about vaccines, etc., which is obviously very topical. And what they do in these literature reviews, they look at what the papers say, but they use, there's an actual scale in medical terms of the quality of a paper. You know, what's the sample of patients it's been used on, how many years has it been tested longitudinally, etc. So each paper they have a score on, and the conclusions are linked to this. And on this PhD review, one of the panel members who's an expert on this area said, well, the student who was in innovation, it's not perfect, but use case it to critique your literature and to argue, because the student was going to do the 15th piece of case study research in their topic. And the argument, I'm going to do the 15th set of case studies, is quite weak. Well, there's 14 before, you know, why should you do the 15th? And this advisor, this professor said, well, use case it to show that those other 14 are good or not so good and learn from them. And then you've got a very good argument why you're doing 15, because there might be 14 that aren't very good, or 14 in the wrong theoretical sampling in the wrong industry. So I thought that was very useful. I learned a lot from that as well. But thanks, Brian and Fabrício. Obviously, with such a big group, we thought we'd do the breakouts because at least you get to meet 1 or 2 other people as well, so it does break it up. But perfect lead into past section about writing it all up. There's 10 criteria. How do you do that? How do you do it in a smooth way? Thanks very much, Fabrício, and over to my very good colleague, Åhlström.
Thank you, Keith. It's great to be here. I'm going to see if I can share my slides. There I am. I'm using 2 computers because I got different problems with both of them. So hopefully this should be working. I think I'm sharing now. So yeah, thank you for setting this up, both the EBRAT. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk to you guys, but also Keith for the lead in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take what Keith has done a bit further, and I think the The focus is on the presentation and interpretation of case study research. So it builds on the work we've done for KSET. It's Keith, myself, and our colleague Mattia Bianchi. We're particularly focusing on case presentation and case interpretation. Sorry, I'm just going to find out there. There I am. So here again, the framing is the case set. So what we're really focusing on is case presentation and case interpretation. So the idea there is for case presentation, the question we're asking, were findings and empirical evidence presented in a way that made it clear how the authors reached their conclusion? So can you as a reader follow the logic that led to the conclusion? That's the first question, case presentation. Case interpretation, the idea there is that how do you move away from or beyond purely kind of describing the case and perhaps conceptually order? How do you make sense of the case to make a more solid contribution to knowledge? That's the thing that's done in the case interpretation. So those two things are the things that we're focusing particularly on now. And Keith said it, but it's important to point out this is work in process. So we're not quite finished yet. So we're very happy to learn from you guys as well. So we're focusing on these two things in terms of case set. So I'm just reiterating this, so it's absolutely clear what I'm focusing on in this particular talk. So case presentation is typically done in the parts of the paper. So the sections may be named empirical results or whatever. It's usually right after the methodology section. But of course, empirical evidence can appear in different parts of the paper. That's usually where you find the bulk of it. And the biggest challenge we have in doing case research is that it's really challenging to demonstrate how you analyze the data. I mean, all of you who are doing case research, you know this challenge. You spend, I don't know, several weeks inside a company or many companies, and you get really interesting insights, but how do you explain to everyone else where those insights came from? That's a real challenge. And you probably noticed that from reading case research as well. Case interpretation then, well, that's the other part. How do you make sense of the evidence in more general and conceptual terms? So how do you move beyond saying that company X did this and company Y did that? How do you move beyond that to kind of more solidly contribute to knowledge? And usually done in the discussion and synthesis and conclusions part of the paper. So hang on a second. Bear with me, my computer did something weird for me. There I am, I'm back. So these are the two things that we're focusing on. And just to remind us, this is kind of what we found out in the case of paper, that in our 0-1 categorization, we ran about a third and a quarter respectively did well on this criterion on average, and it varies a bit per journal, but this is a challenging part. So it's not like these papers were doing really badly. They were doing okay-ish, but there are other reasons that we wanted to focus on these two particular things. First of all, it's kind of the core of case study research. It's where you signal quality, it's where you get impact. And it's also a lot of craftsmanship in writing up case research. If anything, it's an art as much as a science. And the significant heterogeneity in quality and style across papers and authors, and also, of course, in disciplines. I gather we're a cross-disciplinary gathering here, which is very exciting. So this will vary across disciplines as well. But if you look at it, and what we have found at least, if you look at the usual suspects when it comes to case study citations, Yin's work, Miles and Huberman, and Saltana nowadays. they're very strong in giving you very, very good ideas on how to analyze case data, but they don't say that much about how you actually write it up. And of course, analyzing case data, that's where you start building quality, but you still have to write it up, and there you find a lot less hints on what to do. So we wanted to go deeper in these two aspects. So that's what we're up to now. So what is then quality in case presentation and interpretation? That's the kind of first question we needed to ask ourselves. Why is a paper excellent in this regard? And this is what I'm going to spend the rest of the time on, because that's how far we've got. I'll also be giving you a few examples of papers that have done things well. And what we've done in this particular research is that we've sampled really the top journals and the top papers in these journals that have to do with innovation management, because that's our academic discipline for this paper. And we started reading them, and we read, I don't know, 10 or 15 so far, but we read them very, very thoroughly. So it takes about half a day per paper, and then we spend at least half a day together discussing what we've learned. So it's a kind of a long and laborious, but also very exciting process. So this is work in process. And so how do you achieve it then? What we do is that, first of all, we need to distinguish between the quality in case presentation from the quality in case interpretation. The quality in case presentation, we denote as trustworthiness, because these two things they're different things. Quality in one thing is not necessarily the same thing as quality in another. So trustworthiness has to do with your ability to convince. It's another term being used in literature, is how convincing is it? I mean, you want to convince someone and you want them to feel that you are trustworthy, so that your results are trustworthy. So we've used the term trustworthiness. I'll come back to that. We also have quality in case interpretation, and there it's about the contribution that you make, the contribution to knowledge. So these two aspects these are two aspects of quality that are different, that we want to explore further. And if we look at trustworthiness of the presentation, and relatively recent definition of trustworthiness, which particularly has to do with qualitative research, is from Pratt et al. I think it was an editorial in ASQ, is the degree to which the reader can assess whether the researchers have been honest in how the research has been carried out and reasonable in the conclusions they make. And others have used other terms, so whether it's credibility, confidence, authenticity, or whatever, but we've stuck with the term trustworthiness. And one way of seeing this, it's like in the iceberg metaphor. So you have, well, people use that for a lot of different things, but in this case, the point of using this metaphor is that above the water, that's what you can see. It's the paper, it's what you write up. And below the surface, there's all kinds of things that you have been doing. You collected the data, you've analyzed it, and those are the things that the readers cannot assess. The only thing they can assess is what's above the waterline, and that's the point. That's why you can judge trustworthiness, and it's the trustworthiness of the whole endeavor. So it's unseen. It's hidden behind the scenes. So I mean, I guess in theory, of course, one way of having really high trustworthiness is to report everything you did. But then you have another problem. It's going to be too long, particularly for a journal paper. And it's probably going to be very, very boring to read. So you have this trade-off between length and adding all the different details that you could. So you have to be captivating at the same time as you're trustworthy. So that's the trade-off, or one of the trade-offs. So it's kind of the trade-off between telling the whole story and presenting the full evidence. So if we come back to this, one way of looking at it, it's also about looking at as a visibility aspect. You cannot see what's below the waterline, so you require of the reader a leap of faith to actually believe what you're saying above the waterline. And another set of authors put it like this. I thought it was very succinctly put, that you should be given sufficient presentation of the evidence to have enough of a background to be able to agree or disagree with the researcher's interpretation of the evidence or of the data. So you give the readers a chance to judge whether or not they think that your interpretation is a good one. So it's not really, it's not about necessarily, well, it's not about whether or not you're truthful. It's more about how you're working with the reader to ensure that they have a chance to understand where you're coming from. And in that sense, another metaphor that we use is something called the line of visibility. It's a concept from service engineering, I guess. So when you're engineering or designing a service, there's usually somewhere where you have a line of visibility. That's the one that separates your back office from your front office. What you can see is the front office, and you can sometimes design it in such a way that you move this line of visibility. So in a case research setting, you design your study, you collect the data, you analyze the data, and you write it up. And the reader cannot see, and that's the point of this metaphor, the reader cannot see what's behind the line of visibility. So I can't judge how you designed the study, how you collected the data, how you analyze the data, but I can judge the write-up. So that's where I judge whether it's trustworthy or not. And whether or not it's trustworthy, what we are working with now is a set of dimensions, 8 dimensions, and I'm going to go through them. So one aspect of trustworthiness is whether the reader can verify what the authors write, if you want to. Another aspect, if we call it unfiltered, if you report raw data, not yet filtered by analytical lenses. Thick is if authors report contextually rich data, that kind of proves that you've been there and you have a deep immersion in the field. That leads to trustworthiness. If we, as a reader, perceive that you're not hiding anything relevant, it's complete. That is trustworthy, or helps increase trustworthiness. If you're transparent, that you show how you analyze the case data to arrive at findings. Whether or not we call it remarkable, we still need to find a better name for that. But to what extent you as a reader can judge the analytical prowess of the case study authors. Whether the presentation is flowing, is it how do the parts fit together? And finally, the extent to which the authors exhibit characteristics of being self-critical of their work and kind of openly mentioned alternative empirical choices. So it's both on the right-hand side, author properties, so kind of properties in the author, but also properties of the data. The thing is that to some extent, these are also related. They're related in the sense that there are kind of there's a risk of a trade-off between them. So there's a trade-off between unfiltered and remarkable, for instance. How do you show prowess in analyzing case data at the same time show me the data so I can do some analysis myself? There's definitely a trade-off between complete, not hiding anything, and having the presentation flow. So there's built-in tensions in all of these. Just quickly, because I realize I'm taking a lot of time on doing this, let me quickly go through these, just give one typical example of how it has been done. We start by transparency. A common approach, perhaps too common nowadays, is using different kind of templates, and a very popular one is the Gioia method, so-called, because here you kind of show the readers the various steps in the analysis. You show the first order informant concepts, and then you develop second order themes, and the second order themes are then developed. So it's like a reverse funneling process when you move upwards from the data up to your concepts. There are some interesting papers using this particular type of approach. There are also some drawbacks to it, but I'm not going to develop that here. But it's a way of showing transparency. That is, it's getting increasingly common that people use it. But there's also an increasing debate on whether it's a good idea to use this approach every time, and it's probably not. This is an example. Davis and Eisenhardt picked a few examples from them because, well, they do a number of things really interestingly, but particularly on the dimension of being remarkable, we all think that they are doing really well. This is how the people show, or they particularly show their ability to process data. The term remarkable is not perfect, but that's the one we're sticking with for the moment. So transparency is the fact that you can actually see the analysis process, but the analysis process might not necessarily be good. But if you can show me how you did it, I can at least judge whether I think whether I trust it or not. Here with remarkable, we're making a judgment of the ability of the authors to actually analyze the data. Have they followed all these great tips that you find in, for instance, Miles and Huberman and Yin? And this is just one example of a very structured way. So in this particular example, they're looking for evidence of innovation performance. So they have 5 different ways of judging innovation performance in a project. So they look at new technologies and intellectual property. They looked at new improved platforms and products. They have subjective ratings. They look at market performance, and they also use quotations. So 5 different ways in judging whether a particular project was successful in terms of bringing out innovations or not. So it's really, we think, at least a really clever way of actually showing analytical prowess. And in terms of verifiability, it is about the ability of the reader to judge the data themselves. So of course, it's not always possible, but if a prerequisite here is that you are able to name the organization, or if you use secondary data from public sources, facts that are in the public domain, maybe archival documents or anything. But the point is that does the reader have an opportunity to check the data? Not necessarily that they want to do it, but if you're able to use data that is verifiable, that can help to, of course, increase the trustworthiness. Of course, you realize that it's impossible to do all these 8 things well. There is a trade-off between them, but this is one way in which you can help convince the reader of the trustworthiness of your analysis. Raw data, so quotes, speeches, dialogues, mission statements, factual events, numerical counts, etc. This is from an Academy of Management journal paper by Van Oorschot, where they used part of their argument was built on the actual versus the actual and planned full-time equivalent staff availability. Don't remember exactly what the point they were making to this, but it was a way of using factual raw data as part of the argument in the paper, and it worked pretty well for them. When it comes to completeness, of course, this super trade-off between whatever page numbers you're having in the journal you're submitting to, of course, the page limitation is a real issue. So what increasingly is being done is using online appendices where you have more detail. So again, returning to Davis and Eisenhardt, what they did is that to the right, you have the table that's in the paper. I think they had 8 cases. So they made an excerpt in the particular paper, and then they referred to an online appendix which contain all the details. So this is their own analytical matrix, which then led to parts in the paper. So you could, if you wanted to as a reader, you could check their analysis. Very cleverly done. And of course, you can use that also in the review process. Sometimes it's about convincing the reviewers first, and then you can not include everything in the paper, but not have online appendices, but give people appendices. And then we have thickness, or thick description is obviously a term taken from ethnography. They are typically very strong on this. So you have very thick, detailed descriptions, which are often very well written, which in themselves become a way of being convinced. And ethnographies and single case studies are using this a lot. But what if you have multiple case studies? Well, one way of doing it is empirical vignettes, we call them again. Davis and Eisenhardt, we keep coming back to them, but of course, the second author is one of the acknowledged case study experts, and you can see why when you read their work. They use empirical vignettes, so these are kind of little snippets of information where they have factual information, they have interview quotes, they have other things, they have interpretations, but it's a way of condensing. Well, it's not a full ethnography, but it's at least gives you a flavor for I don't know, the dates, the chain of events, the actors involved, the situations, the quotes, etc., dialogues. So you can put a lot of different things into these, but it's one way of doing it. Caution is mentioning alternative explanations or rival explanations. So could we have done it in another way? So it's always good to kind of try to motivate why you think your choices are the better ones compared with the alternatives, because some authors do it very explicitly. They bring up alternative interpretations and show why these interpretations were not made. So that helps convince the reader. And then in terms of flowing, it's following similar or a particular flow, following a framework J, a single case paper in J. Did a very good job of kind of having a flow in this presentation, so that in itself helped convince you. So this is about how all the different pieces fit together. When it comes to quality in case interpretation, which is about making a contribution, which is of course what research is about at the end of the day. And in a sense, this is about how you drive towards some new kind of contribution to knowledge. Just quickly, we find 3 dimensions here, and we can position them, first of all, in a kind of horizontal axis, which has to do with time, and then the vertical axis, which has to do with context. So we start by the past. It's the dimension of grounded. So how well grounded are you in existing literature? And then future tense, which is usable. How can others use your findings? And then this vertical dimension, which has to do, which is invariant of time, which has to do with how can you extend the findings to other contexts. So if we look at these 3, then I'm going to do it like this. One way of increasing usability is to present findings in terms of a conceptual model. There are different ways of doing this, but this is one way. And this is the extent to which others, future projects, then can pick up your results and and move them further. It tends to be easier if it's expressed as frameworks or propositions or whatever. That tends to simplify things. Another way of increasing groundedness is more oriented towards past research. It's about how well does your research connect to what has been done. And there are different ways of doing this, but one way is to very explicitly, like Åhlström et al. Did, Organization Science 2012, they looked at explicitly what did they contribute to the different discussions that they were interested in participating in. And finally, the boundary conditions. All theory comes with boundary conditions, and this is just one example. Probably, I think it is probably from Davis and Eisenhardt as well. But how do you actually articulate the boundaries of your findings? So what we've been trying to do then is, what we are doing now is kind of looking in more into how you achieve, first of all, what quality is in case presentation and case interpretation. These are the 8+3 dimensions. That's what our current understanding of it. And then our next step will be to more thoroughly look into how do different authors achieve it? And not that we're looking for a particular framework for one way of doing it, but rather seeing different ways of doing it, because it does depend on number of cases, the type of questions you're asking, your philosophical or your view on epistemology in particular, and other things as well. But so these are the things that we're working on currently. So sorry for dragging on a bit, but kind of got carried away explaining a few of the details. So I'll stop sharing here, and then Keith.
Keith, you're muted.
Thanks, Per. So if you could put everybody into groups again, we'd like you just to take, this time it's very short, so just over 15 minutes to think about which ideas can you apply to improve the way you're going to present your case studies and interpret them, either in your thesis if you're doing doctoral research monograph, or increasingly these days it's by publications anyway, and obviously later in career will be by publications. So what are the ideas you can think of to apply to improve case presentation and interpretation? If you could put us all into groups again, please, Ibrat, that would be great. Hopefully you had good discussions in your group. What would you like to do, Pa? Shall we ask a couple of people to volunteer just to share a couple of headline ideas with us?
Yeah, that sounds a good idea.
And this is the stage, obviously, for us late in the afternoon, for some of you still in the morning, where it's dangerous to ask for volunteers from a group of 58. But can we have a couple of volunteers just to show us their discussions, or share with us their discussions on presentation and interpretation?
I can jump in.
Thanks, Sophie.
Yes.
So I can represent group 15. So we had a nice range of people, everyone from professors to people just starting out their PhD projects. And so I think this section, some of the conversations centered more around people who have data or who are going to have data soon to report. And so we just discussed some of the tensions that come up that Per also highlighted when it comes to space constraints, wanting to be transparent, and also I think privacy concerns, wanting to share data, but being concerned about, how much to give away. I, for instance, have some video and field data that, would have to be blurred out if I was going to show that. That could be great, but obviously it's additional work on my end to try and do that and help my participants stay anonymous. So we had some conversations about that, and then also how to present the data. So data charts, the Joya method, we talked about that a little bit, as well as, trying to show what we were including and what we were choosing not to include, and sort of wanting to be transparent about what we were keeping in and getting feedback from people about what to keep in as we developed the paper. while also recognizing that it can be overwhelming to do that in a 15-minute presentation to show everybody everything that you have.
Great, thank you. Very good reflections. What do you think, Keith?
Yes, I think it's very interesting on that, and also like the fact you raised confidentiality, Sophie, because there's a move in some other social sciences that all the data must be available. And when I read about that, and there's a big debate in some of these other social sciences, not in management, and in management it wouldn't be realistic. A lot of the work, certainly that Par and I do around innovation, is sort of the new products and services or innovation, so it's very confidential, so you'd never be able to do that. So it's always going to be what you put online would have to meet with confidentiality requirements, which might be totally make it anonymous, etc. So really good reflections. Thanks for group 15. Par and I managed to get around a lot of the groups. I didn't get as far as 15, Sophie, so sorry we didn't get around to your group to have a chat directly. Could we have just one more team, another volunteer, just to share with us last? Who in another group would just like to share a couple of the key things from their discussions?
Well, I could volunteer for my team. My name is Anoop Nair. I'm from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, UK.
Thanks, Anoop.
So we did have a discussion about part A and part B of the presentation, and what was sort of puzzling to us is that some of the examples that you'd given us regarding exemplar papers on transparency and the interpretation, those are all based off different theoretical assumptions. I mean, for instance, some of them are theory building papers, some of them are theory extension papers, some of them are actually theory testing papers. So one of the questions that kept popping up was, would a one size fits all kind of template be suitable for evaluating different kinds of theoretical contributions that rely on the case study approach, generically speaking? Because again, the case study approach itself, I mean, if you look at the Eisenhardt paper, that's actually a multiple case study approach, whereas the sort of Gioia method generally applies to single organizations. So if the panel had any views about that, that would be of much interest.
Yeah, I can start. My reflection is that these dimensions, which is how far we've come, we think that they are generally applicable, but you can score, you can be convincing or appear trustworthy in different ways. So some papers are trustworthy in some ways and some are in other ways. So it's not all papers score equally high on each dimension, and that's fine because you can't score high on all of them because there are trade-offs. And certainly what we are thinking as we kind of progress this work towards looking at practices, what are people actually doing? Yeah, there is no one size. There's no one size fits all. That's the problem with the Gioia method, is that it's being used as it should fit everything. It doesn't. So what we're hoping to do is develop some idea of various ways of doing it, not one way, because there isn't one. So I completely agree on that. Depends on whether it's theory developing, theory testing, number of cases, the depth of immersion, your view on philosophy of science or what have you. So there are a few different things that I agree. That's my reflection. I don't know, Keith.
Yeah, but I really think it's great that your group brought up this issue. I know, because what we're never saying, whether it's the case it for the sort of more the design or when it comes in case interpretation and presentation, that there is a simple recipe. What we're starting to see on that, there's some ideas. These are not best practice that you should apply in your paper. What we're thinking is that probably are a set of sort of strategies where you mix and match, and then probably you're making the decisions on which of those presentation strategies is most appropriate if you're theory building or theory testing, etc. And that's something we found is not at the moment very well presented in the methodology literature. So I think Mars and Human's a great book, and we've got the latest editions on my desk here at the moment. But essentially, it gives about sort of 30 different ways, and it doesn't sort of talk about the contingencies, which would be more for theory building or theory testing and things like that. So that's what we're looking to do, and we hope the end result will be a set of guidelines to guide your thoughts and your decisions. This is not guidelines do ABC. It will be more probably these are the guidelines, think about these things versus your type of research versus whatever. Don't know those yet, but what are the sort of the contingencies? Think of these and then make the best decision within those. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thanks for that. And sort of a follow-up to that would be, and this is just a personal observation, in your part B presentation, one of the things I was puzzled by was I did see transparency, and what was the second term you used? Sorry, it just eludes my mind. There were two criteria that you used, transparency and something else.
Yeah, we used different things. So which one were you thinking of?
No. So you used transparency for presentation and some other criteria for interpretation.
Contribution. Yeah, interpretation we used. So it's forward-looking. So how backward-looking? How grounded is it? And then how usable it is, and then.
Yeah. No, so the thing that came to mind was, we've all come across that Davis paper in terms of that's interesting. So how come whether the case is interesting or not never features in the presentation criteria?
No, that's true. It doesn't.
Because ultimately, I think, whether something is trustworthy or not, I think even before that, I think interesting is this interesting or not is the sort of question I guess editors ask before they even get into the merits of the paper.
Yeah, I see your point. We need to think about that one, but I think there are different dimensions. If it's interesting but not trustworthy, I personally wouldn't be convinced. I think it has to be trustworthy, and then yeah, it's great if it's interesting. It's better if it's interesting. But I agree, we haven't. I mean, there are those criticizing his view of everything having to be interesting as well. Because, but that's a good point.
Great. From my side, thanks, because that's also given us a lot of thought for our next stages on the research as we try and address a lot of these issues. To some extent, we're not going to solve them, but at least get them to a stage where I think it's a lot that the debate we're having, I think it's very useful for us, but hopefully for you guys as well. It's quite often recognizing the issues and being able to debate them and then make your decision. That's the most important thing, to have some clarity and some ways of getting that discussion going. So that was from time-wise, that was everything from us, because we wanted to keep to our time.